The morning light crept through the thin curtains of Amara Lewis's small Georgia home, casting golden streaks across her kitchen table, the same table where her mother once braided her hair and taught her to pray before sunrise. The quiet hum of cicadas filtered through the window screen as the coffee pot hissed and filled the air with warmth and ritual. Amara moved with practiced grace, steady, precise, always a step ahead of the day. Her uniform, pressed and clean. Her ID badge clipped neatly to her chest. In the corner, her teenage son, Malik, hunched over a bowl of cereal, earbuds in, head nodding faintly to a beat only he could hear. "Eat slow, baby," she said softly, packing his lunch. "You chew like time's chasing you." Malik grinned without looking up. "That's 'cause you always say time waits for nobody." She smiled, the kind that carried both pride and fatigue. "Touché." For a few quiet minutes, they existed in peace, mother and son, in the kind of rhythm that only comes from years of holding the world together between paychecks and prayer. On the refrigerator door hung a faded photo of Amara's mother, Alma, the woman who'd cleaned houses in that same town for 30 years, who'd once told her, "Don't let them decide what you're worth, baby girl. Make them see it." By 7:15, Amara was out the door, jogging down Maple Street, her sneakers slapping the cracked sidewalk in time with her breath. The air was heavy with humidity and the smell of pine. Passing neighbors waved, some out of kindness, some out of habit. She waved back, always polite, always composed. That was how she survived here. Durham Industries sat on the edge of town, its smokestacks cutting through the morning haze. The factory had been the lifeblood of this place for generations, and its quiet chain. Inside, metal clanged, forklifts beeped, and the air carried the sharp tang of oil and iron. Amara was one of only 3 women in the quality control department, and the only black one. 10 years of. She laughed softly. "Relax? I don't even remember what that feels like." The sun dipped below the pines outside, painting their small house in amber light. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, grateful, steady, unaware that the life she'd so carefully balanced was about to tilt. The first crack in the foundation was already forming, and it would begin not with a shout or a blow, but a question whispered in a conference room the following Monday morning. "Amara, are you sure these numbers are correct?" Monday mornings at Durham Industries always carried a certain tension, the kind that hummed quietly beneath fluorescent lights and polite smiles. The factory floor came alive before dawn, the metallic clang of machinery blending with a murmur of tired voices and coffee-fueled sighs. Amara moved through it all like a conductor guiding an unseen orchestra, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, posture unbreakable. She was calm, centered, a quiet constant in a place built on noise. But that calm began to tremble the day Greg Hensley walked in. He was the new regional manager, sent from corporate headquarters, a man in his early 40s with a crisp gray suit that looked out of place amid the oil stains and steel beams. His handshake was firm, his smile polished, his words wrapped in honey. "Just here to modernize operations," he'd said in the introductory meeting, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "We're one team, one family." It didn't take long for Amara to feel the chill beneath that warmth. Greg's eyes lingered on her during briefings, not with curiosity, but with calculation. In meetings, he praised ideas from younger, less experienced men while glossing over hers. Once, after she presented a data analysis that identified efficiency gaps, he smiled thinly and said, "You've got a great head for details, Amara. But sometimes leadership means knowing when to let others take the reins." The room had chuckled politely. Amara didn't. She simply nodded, pen tapping once against her. A soft ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Her colleagues shifted in their seats. No one spoke. Amara inhaled slowly, forcing her tone calm. "I did check, and I can show my audit trail." Greg smiled, not kindly, but like a man watching a trap close. "Let's review that privately later, shall we?" After the meeting, she stood alone in the hallway, watching as everyone dispersed. Rosa passed her a sympathetic look. Mr. Henry, pushing his mop down the corridor, gave her a small nod, quiet solidarity in a world where words could cost you a job. That afternoon, Greg stopped by her station. "You're doing great work," he said, leaning just close enough for her to smell the faint cologne that accompanied all his false pleasantries. "But just remember, when things go wrong, leadership's about accountability. I trust you'll handle it." He left her with that, a compliment that felt like a warning. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. Machines clanked, lights flickered, and Amara felt the walls of the factory closing in, the air heavy with suspicion. She stayed late, double-checking every figure, every log. Her hands trembled only once, when she realized a new password had been added to the shared system without her authorization. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple. As she locked the office, she caught her reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, steady spine, a woman carrying both grace and fury in equal measure. On the drive home, Malik called from basketball practice. "You sound off," he said. "I'm fine, baby," she replied, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "Just long day." But as she hung up and drove into the dusk, the truth settled deep in her chest. Something was coming. And this time, patience might not be enough to save her. Friday arrived heavy with heat, the kind that made the air shimmer above the asphalt and pressed against your chest when you breathed. Inside the factory, the mood was different. Hushed, uneasy. Conversation stopped when Amara walked by, eyes flickering toward her, then away. She felt it immediately, that invisible current of something shifting against her. By noon, whispers had spread faster than smoke. Something about a shipment, a failed inspection, a government contract. Amara kept her focus, her pen tapping rhythmically on the clipboard, though her pulse thudded in her ears. Just after lunch, an announcement came over the intercom. "All quality control supervisors, report to conference room B immediately." The words carried the kind of weight she'd learned to recognize, trouble dressed in protocol. When she entered the room, everyone was already seated. Greg stood at the front beside a company attorney, his jacket off, sleeves rolled neatly as if he'd planned this for weeks. Stacks of printed reports were laid out across the table. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound until he spoke. "Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'll get right to it." His tone was calm, almost apologetic. The government inspector flagged serious inconsistencies in last week's shipment. It appears the final product didn't meet federal safety standards. He paused for effect, scanning faces, letting the tension tighten like a noose. Then, slowly, he picked up a sheet of paper, the ink still crisp, her name printed neatly at the bottom. According to this documentation, he continued, the calibration report was signed off by Ms. Lewis. The words landed like a stone in a quiet pond. Amara blinked, her voice steady. "That's impossible. I didn't approve that batch." Greg's expression was all false sympathy. "Well, your signature is right here. Perhaps there was a mix-up?" He slid the page toward her. Her name stared back, curved, perfect, forged. The same neat loops she'd learned from her mother's cursive, replicated down to the last detail. For a long moment, Amara said nothing. She just looked at the paper, her pulse roaring in her ears. Everyone watched her, some with pity, others with quiet relief that it wasn't them in the crosshairs. She lifted her gaze, meeting Greg's eyes. "You know that's not mine." He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then perhaps you can explain why your login credentials were used to authorize these entries." A tremor rippled through her hands, but she clasped them tight beneath the table. Her voice came measured, calm, a blade wrapped in silk. "Someone's been altering files under my name. I've raised concerns about it before. You said you'd look into it." Greg gave a gentle, dismissive shrug. "Well, you can understand how this looks, right? Corporate can't ignore such a serious breach. For now, you're suspended pending investigation." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Her coworkers shifted uncomfortably. Rose's eyes glistened with quiet rage. Mr. Henry stared at the floor. Amara stood slowly, her breath shallow but even. "So you're walking me out? After 10 years. Greg sighed, performing regret like a man accustomed to rehearsed empathy. "It's just procedure. You'll have a chance to clear this up, of course." Security entered, 2 men in navy jackets, eyes avoiding hers. They didn't touch her, but they didn't need to. The humiliation was enough. As she gathered her things, she could feel the weight of every stare. Years of loyalty and excellence reduced to a single false page. Her ID badge, her symbol of belonging, now felt like a tag marking her as disposable. Rosa stood halfway from her seat, whispering, "You don't have to take this." Amara paused, forcing her voice steady. "I'll be fine." She wasn't. Not yet. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside, the air hit her like fire. Malik's car idled at the curb, the engine running, music low. When he saw the security guards behind her, his face twisted in confusion. "Mom? What's going on?" She opened the passenger door, her voice soft but strained. "Drive home, baby." He hesitated. "Did they?" "Drive," she said again, this time firmer. As they pulled away, Amara stared through the windshield, her reflection merging with the gray sky above. Her mind replayed every meeting, every misunderstanding, every moment she'd been told to calm down, to be patient. It all connected now. Every subtle dig, every erased note. Her hands trembled once before she stilled them on her lap. The voice of her mother echoed faintly in her mind. "Don't let them take your peace." By the time they reached their small house, the tremor was gone. She unlocked the door, set her purse on the table, and exhaled slowly. Then she turned toward Malik, her expression calm, deliberate. "They think they can write my story for me," she said. "But they forgot I still have the pen." Outside, thunder rolled low over the Georgia hills. And somewhere inside her, past the pain, past the humiliation, something sharper began to awaken. Night had a way of amplifying silence in Amara's house, that thick, humming kind of stillness that makes every breath sound louder, every thought heavier. The kitchen table, once covered in schoolbooks and Malik's half-finished sketches, was now buried beneath stacks of papers, flash drives, and printed reports she'd pulled from her work archives. The faint glow of her laptop bathed her face in cold light, reflecting in her tired eyes. It had been 2 days since her suspension. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't answer. Pitying texts from coworkers, cautious ones from HR, a polite checking an email from Greg that made her stomach turn. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old printer ink. Malik sat across from her, watching, silent. He'd never seen her like this, so still, so focused like a soldier before battle. "Mom," he said quietly, "you've been up all night again." She didn't look up. "I know. You should sleep." Her fingers moved over the keyboard, steady and precise. "I can't." Malik sighed, pushing his chair back. "You always told me to fight smart, not hard. Is this what you meant?" That made her pause. She lifted her eyes, soft but fierce. "Exactly." When Malik finally went to bed, she sat alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of memory. Her mind drifted back to a different time, a different version of herself. One who wore heels instead of steel-toed boots, who spent her days in clean conference rooms drafting safety protocols for a defense contractor in Atlanta. Back then, she'd been engineer Amara Lewis, youngest black woman on the compliance board, until her mother got sick, until she packed up her life, moved back to her hometown, and took the first job she could find at Durham Industries. What they saw as a good worker from the old neighborhood had once been a woman who'd written policy for federal audits. They had no idea who they were dealing with. She opened a folder labeled Archived System Logs, her fingers moving fast. Each keystroke felt like an act of resurrection. Years of training resurfaced: file encryption, audit tracing, metadata recovery. She was speaking an old language again, one she'd tried to forget. Her cursor hovered over a file timestamp for the night before the failed shipment. Her login credentials. But the IP address didn't match her workstation. She zoomed in, eyes narrowing, the signature of someone editing remotely from Greg's office terminal. Her pulse quickened. There it was, a digital fingerprint. Proof. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. For the first time in days, her body relaxed. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining it. Outside, rain began to patter softly against the windows, a low rhythm that seemed to echo her heartbeat. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The tension she carried all week began to shift into something else. Not anger, but clarity. She opened her email and began drafting a message. The recipient, Taryn Cole, a name she hadn't typed in over a decade. Taryn, it's Amara. I don't know if you remember me, but I need your help. Something's happening at Durham Industries, and I think it's bigger than just me. She hesitated, fingers hovering, then hit send. Moments later, her phone buzzed. A new message flashed on the screen. I remember you. Let's talk. She stared at those words for a long time, the first lifeline in a sea of silence. Later that night, when Malik came out for water, he found her still awake, typing. You're building something, he murmured. She looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips. No, she said. I'm rebuilding. The clock read 2:43 a.m. The lamp's light flickered as thunder rumbled far off over the Georgia hills. On the table before her, lines of code and spreadsheets filled the screen, evidence layered like brushstrokes of quiet defiance. Amara sat straighter, her expression calm and steady. Somewhere deep inside, beneath years of obedience and restraint, the strategist she once was had reawakened. The woman they dismissed as just another factory worker was about to show them who she really was, a woman who didn't just survive systems. She outthought them. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the world beyond her window. Inside, Amara's fingers flew faster, her breath even. Each click of the keyboard was a promise, one she made to her mother, to Malik, to herself. They tried to steal her dignity. They forgot she built her own. By Thursday morning, the air in town felt different, charged, unsettled, as if everyone sensed a storm brewing before they saw the clouds. It began with whispers, a few shared posts online. Then the headline appeared on the Atlanta Sentinel's website, glowing on every phone and television screen across Georgia. Whistleblower alleges data tampering at Durham Industries ahead of federal contract bid. Beneath it, a photo of Amara, taken from her company ID, stared out, her expression calm and unreadable. The story spread like wildfire. It detailed falsified safety reports, tampered audits, and insider claims that a supervisor had been suspended for refusing to cover it up. The article didn't name Greg directly, but it didn't have to. Everyone at Durham Industries knew. The factory had never seen this kind of attention. Neither had the town. At first, Amara didn't know the article had gone live. She was at home, frying eggs for Malik before school, the radio murmuring softly from the counter. When the broadcaster said her name, her hand froze midair. Local supervisor Amara Lewis, a 10-year employee at Durham Industries, is at the center of a developing investigation into falsified reports connected to a federal defense contract. The spatula clattered onto the stove. Malik looked up wide-eyed. Mom, that's you. She didn't answer. The room filled with the sound of sizzling oil and her own shallow breathing. Then, softly, she said, finish your breakfast. She moved through the day in a haze of phone calls and half-finished thoughts. Reporters left voicemails. HR sent a curt email. Please refrain from speaking publicly. Greg's message came next, short, performative concern wrapped in corporate control. We're disappointed you chose to involve the media, Amara. Let's discuss this privately. She deleted it. By afternoon, people began showing up. Rosa was first, standing on Amara's porch with tears in her eyes and a trembling smile. You did it, she said. You really did it. Amara shook her head. Not yet. Rosa pressed a hand to her arm. Girl, you don't understand. Folks talking. You started something. Then came Mr. Henry, his posture bent, but his voice steady. He carried a small cassette recorder in his calloused hands. Thought you might need this, he said. Heard something the other night when I was cleaning offices. Amara took it gently, heart pounding. What is it? He looked her straight in the eye. Proof. Later, alone in her kitchen, she pressed play. The recording crackled, voices muffled, then clear. Greg's voice, low and confident. She'll take the fall. No one's going to believe her word over mine. Her knees nearly gave out. She sat hard in the chair, covering her mouth. For a long time, she didn't move, just listened again and again, the sound of his arrogance turning into her strength. That night, Taryn called. The journalist's voice was firm, electric. Amara, we have confirmation from 2 other employees. And one of them says Greg ordered files deleted the same night you were suspended. We're running a follow-up story tomorrow. Amara stared out the window, the town lights glittering faintly through the rain. They'll come after me for this. They already did, Terrence said. Now it's your turn. The next morning, vans from local news stations parked outside the factory gates. Reporters swarmed the entrance as employees arrived for their shifts. The usual chatter was replaced by cameras, microphones, questions. Inside, the staff buzzed with uneasy energy. Rosa called Amara from the floor, whispering, "People are mad. They say if you were framed, they're walking out." Amara stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, watching a small crowd gather outside the factory's chain-link fence. "No," she said quietly. "They shouldn't lose their jobs for me. Just let the truth do what it does." By noon, Durham's mayor held a press conference, promising a full investigation. Corporate spokespeople released stiff statements about internal reviews. And all the while, Greg was silent, nowhere to be seen. But Amara was everywhere, her story spreading through social media, on talk radio, in barbershops and church parking lots. For some, she was a hero. For others, a troublemaker. But no one could ignore her anymore. That night, when Malik came home, he found her sitting on the porch, head tilted toward the stars. "You okay?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "You ever heard the sound of silence breaking?" He frowned. "No." She looked out at the dark road. "That's what this is." And somewhere across town, a man in a suit poured himself a drink in a dark office, watching the news replay her face again and again. For the first time, his hand shook. The call came just after dawn on a gray Monday morning. Amara hadn't slept more than a few hours in days, her mind trapped in a loop of noise. News reports, online comments, Malik's worried glances, Greg's words echoing from the cassette tape. When the phone rang, she almost didn't answer. But something, intuition, maybe, made her pick it up. "Ms. Lewis? My name is Elijah Carter. I'm an attorney with the Southern Civil Rights Defense Coalition. I think we need to talk." His voice carried a quiet steadiness, the kind that made people stop and listen. Within hours, he was at her doorstep. He was tall, mid-40s, his suit slightly rumpled from travel, his eyes sharp with purpose. When he stepped inside, he didn't offer false comfort or empty promises. He simply sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, "You've already done the hardest part. You told the truth. Now we make sure they can't bury it." Amara stared at him, exhaustion softening her voice. "They're trying to ruin me. HR says I violated confidentiality. I haven't worked a day since they suspended me." Elijah nodded, flipping open a leather notebook. "Classic retaliation. I've seen it before. They're betting you'll back down or settle quietly. But you won't." He began outlining a plan. A wrongful termination suit, whistleblower protections, subpoenas for audit records, and a federal complaint citing fraud and racial discrimination. Each word was deliberate, clinical, but beneath it ran something fierce, justice with teeth. By midweek, his team arrived from Atlanta. 2 junior attorneys, a paralegal, and an investigator named Ruby, a no-nonsense woman who could pull records faster than most could blink. They turned Amara's dining room into a command center. Papers spread across the table. Laptops glowed late into the night. The hum of the printer became the new soundtrack of her home. Meanwhile, the company doubled down. Durham's legal department issued press statements denying everything. Greg was temporarily reassigned, but not fired. Anonymous sources leaked stories questioning Amara's credibility, calling her disgruntled, unstable, a liability. The smear campaign was calculated and cruel. When she saw one of those articles, Amara's hands shook. "They're destroying me," she whispered. Elijah looked up from his notes. "They're trying to, but they're not winning." He reached for the cassette recorder that Mr. Henry had given her and pressed play. "Greg's. She'll take the fall. No one's going to believe her word over mine." Elijah leaned back, eyes glinting. "That right there is intent. It's not just evidence. It's arrogance on tape." They began building the timeline, emails, work logs, reports. Ruby traced deleted audit files from the company server to a private USB drive Greg had used. The digital footprint was small, but undeniable. Got him, Ruby murmured, sliding the laptop toward Elijah. The timestamp matches the night Amara was suspended. Elijah smiled faintly. That's the foundation. Now, we bring it into daylight. 2 days later, he filed the lawsuit, Lewis versus Durham Industries. The claims cited racial discrimination, whistleblower retaliation, and fraudulent misrepresentation of federal safety data. Within hours, it hit the news. That evening, Amara stood before the mirror, buttoning a navy blouse. Her reflection looked different, older, steadier. Malik peeked in from the hallway. You going somewhere? She turned, adjusting her earrings. Press conference. You nervous? She exhaled, terrified. But I can't hide anymore. At the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. The wind tugged at her hair as Elijah spoke beside her, his voice firm and clear. Ms. Lewis did what every citizen should be able to do, speak truth without fear. What Durham Industries did was not only unethical, it was illegal. We will hold them accountable. Amara didn't say much. When a journalist asked, "Do you regret coming forward?" she looked directly into the camera and answered, "Regret. No, truth doesn't need permission." The footage aired nationwide that night. Across the country, strangers began sending messages. Factory workers, teachers, nurses, stay strong. You're fighting for all of us. They can't silence the truth. But with the attention came danger. One morning, she found her car keyed, the word traitor scratched deep into the paint. Another night, her mailbox was pried open. She called Elijah, her voice trembling. They're trying to scare me. He replied quietly, that means they're scared. And he was right. The company's board held emergency meetings. Federal investigators began sniffing around. For the first time, the balance of power tilted. Still, Amara knew this wasn't the end. It was the build-up, the calm before the public reckoning. As she stood on her porch one evening, the wind carrying the faint echo of church bells, she thought of her father, a quiet man who once told her, "Baby, justice moves slow, but it moves steady." She closed her eyes, steadying herself in the gathering dusk. Now it was moving. And this time, it was coming for them. The courthouse smelled of old wood and tension. The kind of air that carried history, the kind that remembered every oath, every lie, every verdict that ever tried to hide the truth. The morning sun spilled through high windows, dust dancing in its beams as people filled the benches. Journalists with notebooks, townsfolk whispering, and a few factory workers who had called out of their shifts just to see what happened. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table, her palms pressed flat against the wood to keep them from shaking. She wore a charcoal gray suit borrowed from her cousin, one that didn't quite fit, but made her look like the version of herself she needed to be. Across the aisle, Greg sat flanked by lawyers in dark suits, his posture loose, comfy. She didn't. Elijah leaned in, his voice low. Remember, calm, concise, unshaken. Truth's already on our side. She nodded, exhaling slowly. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The gavel cracked like thunder. Court is now in session for Lewis versus Durham Industries. The opening statements were a battle of tones. The company's lawyer painted Amara as an emotional employee who had misinterpreted standard procedures and reacted impulsively. They spoke about her disciplinary history, which was one minor write-up for tardiness 2 years prior, and implied she had been bitter after being passed up for promotion. When it was Elijah's turn, his voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. His words moved like a slow burn. This isn't about a single mistake, he said. This is about a system that believed it could sacrifice integrity and scapegoat a black woman to protect power. Ms. Lewis didn't lie. She didn't run. She recorded, she reported, and she resisted. And now, she stands before you asking for one thing, accountability. A murmur rippled through the room. When Amara took the stand, the room fell quiet enough to hear the hum of the overhead lights. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. She told them about the altered safety reports, the missing data, the pressure from Greg, the suspension. She described the night she found out she was being blamed, the hollow silence in her apartment, the sound of Malik asking if she'd done something wrong. "Did you?" Elijah asked softly. "No," she said. "I did what I was supposed to do. I told the truth." When the defense cross-examined her, their tones sharpened. "Ms. Lewis, isn't it true you were under emotional distress at the time?" "I was under pressure," she replied. "Not distress. There's a difference." They pressed harder, asking if she had personal grievances against Greg. She looked directly at him then, her eyes steady. "My only grievance is injustice. On the count of wrongful termination and retaliation, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Amara Lewis." The words hit her like a shockwave. Not loud, not triumphant, just real. Greg stared down at the table, his empire cracking in silence. Outside, cameras waited. The courthouse steps overflowed with people. Amara stood in the sunlight, her face calm, eyes wet but unflinching. Elijah spoke briefly, but when reporters asked her for a comment, she stepped forward. "I didn't fight this to be famous," she said softly. "I fought it so no one else would have to sit in a dark room and wonder if telling the truth was worth it. It is. It always is." The crowd erupted, applause, shouts, the sound of something long overdue. Malik ran up and threw his arms around her. "You did it, Mom." She knelt down, whispering, "No, baby, we did." And as she looked out across the crowd, faces of every shade, every story, she realized this was bigger than her. It always had been. Justice had finally spoken. And this time, the world was listening. Weeks passed, and the town began to breathe again, differently this time. The rhythm had changed. Durham Industries, once the unshakable giant of the county, stood under federal investigation. Executives resigned quietly. Greg was stripped of his position, escorted from the building under the dull gaze of the same workers he'd once ordered around. The factory that had made Amara feel small now looked smaller itself, its shiny glass walls reflecting not power, but exposure. Amara didn't return there. She couldn't. Instead, she spent her mornings walking Malik to school through streets that seemed to finally see her. Neighbors who once averted their eyes now stopped to speak, to say thank you, to ask how she was holding up. The stare still came sometimes, but they weren't sharp anymore. More often, they carried something she hadn't seen before: respect.